This account is going to be much briefer than I'd like it to be, but I have very little time. I have little time to write it, and it has little viability once I post it online. I expect it to be deleted within hours of my posting. Hopefully using a VPN will make it harder to trace, and it will stay up long enough for someone to read it, to understand what's happening. Although it's unlikely I'll be able to remain anonymous, I'll be operating under an alias for the moment. In the course of these events, I'll refer to myself as Neenam. It's nonsense, nothing that can be connected to me. I live in a small, rural town in southern Minnesota. We have a population of about 5,000 people. The town is about 5 square miles, located on the prairie and surrounded by farmland. To the west of the town is a lake, about half a mile in diameter. I will codename the town Little Creek to avoid detection. It probably won't matter anyway. I'm sure all online traces of it will have disappeared within the next few hours. I've lived in Little Creek for 23 years, excluding my time at college. I recently returned in order to take care of my mother, who's been sick. I've never noticed anything strange there. It's always been the definition of quiet country living. These developments happened quickly, and somebody needs to know about them before they continue. I have catalogued them here. I hope to God somebody sees this and understands. April 12th, 2017. I returned to Little Creek around 4 in the afternoon. There was road work being done on the interstate as I headed into town. Not unusual. There were also what appeared to be construction workers near the lake to the west of town. They were hauling in heavy-duty equipment for something. Once I arrived home, I asked my mother about it. She didn't know why they were there. I settled in and moved my things back to my old room. April 13th, 2017. I woke up at 6 a.m. Internet was down. I headed to the grocery store at 6:30, where I confirmed with other shoppers that they were experiencing internet problems as well. Now, this is not uncommon where I live. Being out in such a rural area, there's only one internet service provider. At the store, I ran into a local man I'll refer to as Ben. Ben is known throughout the town for his paranoid delusions. Many people believe he suffers from some kind of mental disorder, perhaps schizophrenia. He and I had a short interaction, in which he claimed that the construction workers at the lake were government officials sent to destroy the evidence of illegal conduct extending back to the 1980s. As we spoke, he became increasingly distressed. Eventually, he left the store and I made my purchases and went back home. By noon, my internet was working again. I searched our local news site for more information about the work being conducted at the lake. I found nothing. April 14th, 2017. At 8 a.m, I took my mother to the doctor. While in the hospital waiting room, I encountered various local persons I was familiar with. I asked them about the work being done at the lake, and none of them seemed to know what work was being done, but they all expressed a desire to know. At 2 p.m, I drove down to the lake. I parked my car on the side of the road and approached a group of construction workers to ask about their work. I was stopped by a police officer. He wasn't a Little Creek police officer, and he wasn't a state trooper. He informed me that I was trespassing and that it was too dangerous for me to approach the site. He escorted me to the car and would not answer any questions regarding the lake. April 15th, 2017. At 1 p.m, I had another interaction with Ben. He came to my mother's house and requested to speak with me. He handed me several documents, asked me to read through them, and left. He would not answer any questions and only stayed for about 5 minutes. I've been unable to scan the documents and upload them onto my computer. Instead, I'll read them out loud. He handed me 3 printed newspaper articles and 1 handwritten note. Article 1. Local boy dies under mysterious circumstances. June 16th, 1972. Daniel Thompson, child of Seamus and Elizabeth Thompson, died last week from an unfortunate and undiagnosed sickness. Daniel, age 10, was admitted to the hospital after a period of severe nausea and vomiting. Over the course of the next few hours, Daniel suffered from faintness, dizziness, abdominal pain, and an erratic pulse. He died during the night from heart failure. Daniel is survived by his parents as well as his older brother Ben and his younger sister Christine. The cause of Daniel's sickness is as yet unknown. Anyone with information pertaining to this illness is encouraged to come forward. At the bottom of the article, Ben had written in red ink, "Swimming at the lake," and circled it. Article 2. Death of 16-year-old linked to Little Creek Lake. August 4th, 1978. 16-year-old Stephanie Wilson was found dead near Little Creek Lake 2 weeks ago by a local farmer. The cause of Stephanie's death is as yet unknown. However, locals claim that it may have had something to do with the lake where she had been swimming prior to her death. "That lake is bad news," said Timothy Lysett, owner of Little Creek's Good Foods grocery store. "People who go in there don't come out right." Several locals expressed their agreement, but declined to be interviewed for official commitment. An autopsy is pending to determine the cause of death for the young woman. Any information pertaining to her death should be brought to the police as soon as possible. There were no markings on this page. Article 3, September 20th, 2003. Local child is granted wish. Late last Thursday evening, Alex Tornery was granted his lifelong wish to be the sheriff of the Little Creek Police Department. "It's our honor to have such a good officer join us today," said Officer Brandy, as she showed Alex her cruiser and gave him an in-depth tour of all of its features. Alex, diagnosed last year with leukemia, has been given 6 weeks to live. However, his headstrong and positive spirit has shone through even during these tough times. "I'll be sad to leave Mummy and Daddy, but I know I'll get to see them again someday," Alex told us. He was provided with a police uniform in miniature, as well as his own badge. His parents looked on in the distance, taking pictures to commemorate the occasion. "We just want these last weeks to be happy," Jennifer Tornery said as she watched her son become the new star of the police department. "As long as he's happy, we'll know we..." The page cut off here. In the bottom, written in red ink, "Tornery Farms, lived half a mile from the lake." Handwritten note. "Neenam, you're the only person I can trust with this. You have to act quickly because there isn't much time. I know you went out to the lake the other day. You must have already know what..." The rest of the sentence is unreadable. "In the 1960s, this site was used for government testing. I told you the other day. They made a mistake. They're back to try to clean it up before anyone finds out. It's only a matter of time before someone..." Again, totally unreadable. "They're trying to block any and all of the information relating to the accident. They know that I know. I don't have much time either. We're all being watched. You especially. Find a way to stop them." The note was left unsigned. April 16th, 2017. At noon I went to look for Ben. He wasn't at his house. Nobody knew where he'd been. I didn't look any further. I didn't want to raise any suspicion. I assumed Ben was crazy, but I was also paranoid about what was being done down at the lake. April 17th, 2017. At 8 a.m, I was awoken by a scream from outside the house. Upon reaching the window, I saw a child lying outside on the sidewalk. She was covered in vomit. Her skin was red, as though severely sunburned. Her mother was on her knees, screaming beside her. Before I was able to get my bearings and move towards the door, the mother stopped screaming and began convulsing. She began to vomit as well, her fingers clawing at her throat. After she'd vomited twice, she fainted next to her child. My mother had come down the stairs at that point. She attempted to leave the house to help the woman and her child, but I held her back. Outside, a man stopped his car and left the vehicle to help the woman and child. He was on his phone, I believe attempting to call for help, when he collapsed on the sidewalk, bringing his hand to his head as though it was in great pain. His skin also began to grow red. I pulled my mother away from the window and set her down in the living room. I checked to make sure all the doors and windows in the house were sealed. We appeared to be safe inside the house. I guessed that the people had become sick because they stepped outside, leading me to believe that the virus, or whatever this was airborne. I attempted to use the landline to call the hospital, but the phone was out. Then I used my cell phone. The hospital line was busy, as was the police line. I turned on the television, but none of the local stations were coming in. I was able to get stations from outside the county, which meant that whatever was happening was local. I decided the best course of action was to try to get my mother and myself out of the town. The garage door was closed, so I assumed it was reasonably safe for us to get to the car. I turned off the air vents and locked the doors. We attempted to leave on the interstate. We weren't the only ones. Several other town members were heading south on the interstate. However, there was a roadblock set up just 2 miles outside of town. It was being manned by several people in hazmat suits. This confirmed my fear that the pathogen was airborne. They were holding guns. I'm not certain what kind. They shot the windshield of the first car. I can't be sure, but I believe they killed the driver. A female passenger exited the car, screaming. They shot her as well. At this point, I turned the car around and went back the way we came. Several other cars followed suit. The man continued to shoot at the retreating cars. I didn't look back to see if they killed anyone else. I saw 2 cars getting into an accident in their attempts to flee. The drivers stumbled out of the wrecked cars and immediately began vomiting on the side of the road. They tried to flag me down to help them, but I kept driving. We tried driving the other direction. I saw the roadblock before we got close enough to be shot. I retreated back into town. By the time we returned to our house, the streets were littered with bodies. I had to drive over some of them to get home. Many of them had strange burns covering their skin. Most were covered in vomit. Many were still alive, but it was clear they would not live for very long. We returned to the garage and I shut the door. I instructed my mother to cover her mouth and close her eyes. I got her into the house as soon as I could. Neither of us showed any symptoms of whatever was happening outside. I instructed my mother to lie down in her room. Once she had calmed down and was resting, I began to gather supplies. I realized that our most direct method of escape, the interstate, was not a viable option. We would need to reassess before we tried anything else. I figured that as long as we were in the house and the vents were closed, which I double-checked as soon as we got home, we would be safe. Once I gathered all the supplies I thought might be useful, I went online to do some research. The time was approximately 10 a.m. I began by trying to research the symptoms I'd observed in the people laying outside, the people who'd been contaminated. The first results that came up on Google were related to acute radiation syndrome. When I attempted to access the sites related to radiation poisoning, however, they were all blocked. This was consistent across 4 or 5 sites. Eventually, I turned my VPN on and was able to access them. Not only did the symptoms match those of radiation poisoning, but the majority of the sites also mentioned nuclear fallout and nuclear testing sites to be closely related to instances of radiation poisoning. Over the next several hours, until about noon, I did as much research into nuclear testing as I could. At 12:30, I went to check on my mother. When I entered her room, she was crouched over the garbage can. She had vomited several times. The skin on her face was red. At this time, I also began to notice that I was experiencing a headache. I believe we've both been contaminated. My mother was already very ill. Her body was not able to withstand the radiation poisoning. She's no longer conscious. She will die in a few hours. At 2, I'll be leaving. I'm going to risk getting into my car and increasing my exposure to the radiation. I believe that if I can get to the hospital in another town, I may be able to survive this. But I have to act quickly. There are dozens of tiny country roads leading out of the town. If I'm careful, I may be able to find one that the government overlooked. Before I leave, I'm detailing what I've learned here. What I think I know about Little Creek in Minnesota. In my research, I stumbled upon something called underground nuclear testing. It's the only testing currently permitted under the Limited Test Ban Treaty. Essentially, nuclear weapons can be tested by detonating them below the surface. If they are detonated far enough below ground, they will be completely contained in the Earth's surface and no nuclear fallout will spread into the atmosphere. Any harmful gases can be extracted and neutralized through controlled tunnel purging. But if the explosion is too close to the surface, it will cause a crater. This is known as containment failure. Radiation from the blast can escape into the atmosphere all at once, or at small increments over many years. A crater would be an obvious landmark. It would raise questions. But a lake? In the land of 10,000 lakes? Nobody would bat an eye at that. And nobody out here would notice the difference between a natural lake and a crater the government had filled with water. That's why the government sent workers to Little Creek Lake. The radiation and hazardous gases were seeping from the lake and infecting the townspeople. The government was hoping to use a controlled tunnel purge to neutralize the gas and radiation. But something went wrong. Something went terribly, horribly wrong. And now they're trying to cover it up. They're going to take Little Creek off the map and all its inhabitants with it. Judging by the numbers of bodies outside, a number that is constantly growing, they've killed off about 90% of the town's inhabitants. But they haven't gotten to me yet. I'm leaving. I don't have much time before I succumb to the radiation poisoning anyway. I might as well try to escape while I have the chance. If I can't, maybe they'll at least shoot me. I'm not stupid. I know I'm not likely to survive the next few hours, let alone the next few days. But I'm gonna try anyway. But you, whoever you are, you have a future. You're somewhere out there, safe. For now. Safe until you read this. Because once you read this, the government will know. They'll know I figured out their secret. They'll know that I've told the world, or as much of it as I was able to. And they'll know that there are people out there who know the truth. Please. For the love of God, please do something! Because if it's happened here, it can happen anywhere. Don't you see? Please do something. Before it's too late. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I'm feeling a lot better. I did have to make a lot of cuts because of sudden coughing fits, but I'll get on top of it, I promise. Here's the thing, we just reached 16,000 subscribers and I would like to thank you all so very much for joining me on my journey, if you will. And I was wondering if you had any questions for me. Because I get a lot of questions left and right. I figured I'd compile them all into a video. And maybe try to make it a bit funny. I don't know, I'm not particularly funny. So I hope to hear from you all. You can either comment down below or send it to me on Twitter and I'll make sure to add it to the list if I think it's interesting enough to answer. Cheerio!